This is my first time recording a video not sitting on the ground, so I would say this is a full-scale production now. Hey guys, it's Michaela back again with another book review, and this one's going to be a little bit different than the ones I've done before. If you've ever been to a Dollar Tree, you may have noticed a section of books just like chilling there for $1. Generally, I've noticed that these books, at least in the Dollar Trees I've been to, have been A, Bibles, B, sort of sketchy self-help types, or C, adult fiction titles that I have never heard of before. I have two great passions in life, and they are buying books and not spending a lot of money. And so $1 books from Dollar Tree are the best of both worlds. Thus, $1 books. This is where I'm going to review books that I have purchased for $1 at the Dollar Tree or elsewhere if there are other places where I can get books for $1. I want to read these books because I am a judgy snob, and I'm going to assume that a book, if it is available for $1, isn't very good, which is a terrible judgment to make, and I want to prove myself wrong. My first $1 book is My Last Lament by James William Brown. This story is adult fiction, and it tells the story of a leaky, who is a Greek woman who is sort of narrating the story of her adolescence to a cassette recorder that has been left behind by an American researcher. This American researcher is interested in a leaky because she is what is known as a lamenter, which is someone who composes mourning songs for the deceased at their funerals or memorials. A leaky's story moves forward and backward in time as her life now, she's very, very old, her life now mirrors her adolescence in Greece in the 1940s, at the tail end of World War II, and then in the immediate years after the end of World War II. This book kind of covers a lot, but basically Aliki was being raised by a family friend named Chrysula, I believe is how it's pronounced, and who also had a son a few years younger than Aliki. His name is Takis. And then towards the end of the war, Chrysula takes in a Jewish refugee named Sophia and her son Stelios. Probably Stelios. Some shit goes down, and Aliki, Takis, and Stelios have to go on the run, and they spend the next couple of years, timeline's a little bit fuzzy, sort of trying to carve out a space for themselves in post-war Greece. There are a lot of things to like about this book, but also a lot of things that I didn't particularly like. I found it generally inconsistent on a lot of fronts. The first is the writing. There were times when the writing was genuinely very breathtaking and stunning, where just full of like beautiful turns of phrase and descriptions of things. And then there would be other times when the writing was so bad, I was physically cringing reading it. I couldn't believe that the whole thing was written by one person because the quality of writing varied so drastically. The same could be said for the pacing. Generally, I found it to be very slow. It took me a really long time to get into it. I prefer faster paced books, and this one was, overall, it was slower, and yet sometimes the plot would just jolt ahead like very quickly, and lots of things would happen very quickly, and it was just it was hard for me to settle into any kind of pacing because it was so jerky and back and forth. Even though, like I said, it did take me quite a while to get into this, about 100 pages or so, I did actually eventually really get into it, and I kind of, especially towards the end, had a hard time putting it down. The author provided at the end a pretty substantial reading list, recommended reading list, and you could tell that he did his homework. I am not Greek. I don't know really anything about Greek history, although, like a lot of queers, I had a very strong Greek mythology phase when I was younger. But I felt like I was being taken on a tour of a very specific, very turbulent time in Greek history. Nothing felt overwrought or dramatized, although it was a dramatic story. I will say that this book does something that really bothers me when books do it, and that is never ever allowing like a moment of happiness to just be. I get that the times being talked about in this book, they're really dark, really harrowing, uncertain times, and I get that, But any time that Leaky and her friends found a tiny pocket of joy or happiness or relief for even a moment, it was always cut short by violence. And while that might have been realistic, it doesn't feel realistic, because humans are good at carving out these little spaces of joy for themselves, even in really dark times. It just feels defeatist when an author, particularly when writing fiction, when you can kind of do whatever you want, never lets one of these moments just breathe. Authors, it is okay to not make everything terrible all the time. Sometimes that's even more shocking than the bad stuff. And that goes for endings too. Your book is not more legit because it has a sad ending, and that's all I'm gonna say on that. Probably the most interesting character, if not most frustrating character in this book, is Takis, who, like I said, is just a couple years younger than Leaky. At one point he's said to be 11 years old, so right around that sort of prepubescent age. He's never given a formal diagnosis because of just the time that the story takes place, but I believe he has schizophrenia. He ends up posing this really big threat to the people in his life because this mental illness that he has causes him to act in unpredictable ways and irrational ways, and this is a time when acting unpredictably and irrationally can get you killed on the spot. Throughout the whole book, Leaky sort of bears the responsibility of caring for him, not only because he's like a little brother to her, but also because she understands that he is not always responsible for his actions, even when they're causing like a lot of harm. This was actually an aspect of the book I went back and forth on a lot. Obviously this is taking place in 1940s Greece, so my 2020 ideas of gender and feminism are a bit more progressive, but essentially at every turn, Leaky has to be extremely cognizant of the emotions and whims of the men in her life, Stelios and Takis, and even though she herself is, very confident, very outspoken, very intelligent, very headstrong, the way that these male figures in her life are feeling always has to take precedent, because it's sort of like her responsibility to manage their emotions. And like, obviously that's very realistic, even for today. Women are always asked to be responsible for the emotional well-being of men, but it was just incredibly exhausting. So I went back and forth on this on whether or not I liked it, because it felt real, but it was also very hard to read. Okay, there are two like just dumb things that bothered me because I'm an asshole. And one of them is there are several times throughout the whole book, little songs or nursery rhymes are included. And this is a story taking place in 1940s Greece. And even though Leaky is relaying the story now in English, everything that would have been happening in Greek. So these things shouldn't rhyme, but they do? Which, what are the chances that when translated from Greek, all of these songs and all of these nursery rhymes rhyme? You know what I mean? Why? That doesn't make sense. The other thing is, like I said, this story is Leaky in the present, narrating this story to a tape recorder, but talking about the past. So every chapter starts off with her, or almost every chapter starts off with her sort of giving a little kind of update on what's happening in the present in this village she's living in, before going back to tell the main story, which is the story of her adolescence. And every single time, the thing that's happening in the present perfectly segues to where she left off in the past. And like, I get that that's good storytelling, but it's also like kind of annoying, like that it always so perfectly works out. And the segues are like so carefully crafted. I'm like, I don't know. It felt too carefully orchestrated for someone to be telling their story organically. And I guess that's my main problem with this book, is that its gimmick feels unnecessary. This is supposed to be an old woman relaying a story that happened 50, 60 years ago to a tape recorder in her second language. But it just feels too polished and too neat. Like, if this were a real story that someone was telling orally, there would be stutters and backtracks and contradictions and sort of jumping back and forth through time a bunch, and like, oh, little reminders to yourself, you know how you tell a story and it's kind of all over the place, especially when it's a story that you're telling over the course of this many pages. And this is my problem generally with stories that are written down that are supposed to be told orally, like the characters are telling them orally. It never feels like that's the case. And if you're not going to do the bare minimum of making me feel like I'm being told a story orally, then what's the point? I hope what I'm saying makes sense. I just want an oral history to feel like an oral history, even if it's being written down. How many times can I say oral before YouTube takes this video down? This wasn't a bad book. It was a little slow and a little annoying and a little all over the place, but generally speaking, I did like it. I gave it 3 stars. Do I think it was worth $1? Absolutely 0 regrets. Do I think I would pay full price for it? Probably not full hardcover price, but maybe full paperback price. If you're looking for a good character book, because that's definitely what this is, it's more of a character book than a plot book, then I do recommend it. It's solidly okay. So that was my first one book review. I'm really glad I did that. I'm glad I read the book. I can't wait to hit up the Dollar Tree again for some more $1 books to review in the future. I hope you all are staying happy and healthy in this coronavirus epidemic. If you are quarantined, enjoy the silence, but also don't be sick. I'm sorry if you're sick. If you are quarantined, I do have a couple other videos, book reviews and such, that I would be very happy if you checked out. And until next time, I will see you guys later. Bye!